In this heartfelt episode, we pay tribute to Samir Bodas, the late CEO and co-founder of Isertis, Seattle Orcas, and TiE Seattle board member. Join us as we delve into the memories and legacy of Samir through the eyes of Monish Darda, co-founder and CTO at Icertis. Monish shares intimate stories of their journey together, highlighting Samir's visionary leadership, infectious laughter, and unwavering dedication to building a consequential company. Discover how serendipity played a role in their entrepreneurial path, the challenges they faced, and the values that shaped the company's culture. Shirish and Gauri also share their stories of Samir as a friend and co-board member of TiE Seattle. Welcome to the Startup to Exit podcast, where we bring you world-class entrepreneurs and VCs to share their hard-earned success stories and secrets. This podcast has been brought to you by TiE Seattle. TiE is a global nonprofit that focuses on fostering entrepreneurship. TiE Seattle offers a range of programs including technology panels, the TiE Entrepreneur Institute, and the TiE Seattle Angel Program. We encourage you to become a TiE member so you can gain access to these programs. To become a member, visit www.seattle.tie.org.
Hello, everyone. Today, we'll be paying a special tribute to Samir Bodas, the CEO and co-founder of Icertis, a leader in contract lifecycle management, who passed away recently following a courageous battle with cancer. Samir was also a longtime board member at TiE Seattle. We will be interviewing Monish Darda today, who is a co-founder and CTO at Icertis. He started with Samir back nine on Icertis, and he'll be sharing his memories of Samir as both a visionary entrepreneur and leader. But before we get started, let me share my personal memories of Samir as a dear friend, colleague, and a successful entrepreneur. I've known Samir since the early 90s when he joined Microsoft. I was actually on the interview loop and thought he would be a great hire for Microsoft. It was clear that he was a smart, energetic young man who had a great future ahead of him. While we didn't work together at Microsoft, we kept in touch socially. He was a great friend, had an amazing laugh, and was very friendly. Later, after many years, we both joined the board of TiE Seattle. Samir was a very active member of TiE Seattle board, even though he was very busy running Icertis at that time. It was very clear that he was very passionate about helping other entrepreneurs. He gave his time generously and was one of the most active members of the board. His advice and guidance were invaluable in helping TiE Seattle become a major force in the Seattle entrepreneurial ecosystem. So it was a real shock to hear that he had passed away after a long battle with cancer. The Seattle area has lost a great entrepreneur who has always led with integrity, and he'll be sorely missed. With that, let me now welcome Monish Darda so he can share his memories of Samir. Welcome, Monish.
Thank you so much, Shirish and Gauri. Thanks for the opportunity as well to share
Great.
my memories.
Great. So, lots has been written about Samir, and we'll discuss kind of his attributes as a visionary founder and leader, etc. But tell us what he meant to you on a personal level.
What can I say? Every time I remember him, there's a big smile on my face. He made me laugh. I remember when he turned 50 and I turned 50, we are just 1 month apart. Birth dates are just 1 month apart. And he called me and he said, Monish, and this is my 50th birthday. I made a resolution. I'm going to laugh more in the rest of my life than I laughed in my first 50 years of my life. I think that's, what I remember every time I remember him now. I think he's been a brother, he's been a friend, he's been a co-founder, especially when you start a company and you get the company to the level of Icertis that we did together. You get much closer than even sometimes your wife, your kids. He was on speed dial before my wife, and I'm sure his phone was exactly set up like that. And I can't put it in words, but I think, you get to know a lot about people when you work with them so closely day and night, right? And you always said, I was a very late riser, but I went to sleep very late. So even today, my schedule is like 2 in the morning. I go to bed at 2 in the morning, wake up at 8:30. And we always used to say between the two of us, we have like only 2 hours where we are not talking to each other. So that's how close he was. And that's what he meant to me.
That's great. That's great. So, how did you first come to meet Samir? I was looking at your background, and it didn't seem like you had worked together in the past. Had you worked with him in the past?
No, so it was very interesting. He was the CEO of Aztec Soft.
Right.
And what happened was my co-founder had actually gone to school with him. And this was my first company with this started in 1997. And we had our own building in Hinjewadi, which is the IT park in Pune. And Aztec Soft was building the facility just in front of our office in Hinjewadi. And Samir was very involved. So, he used to come at least once a quarter to visit and see how the building was progressing. And of course, it was a construction site. So he would come and sit in our office because he knew my co founder. That's how I first met him.
I
And,
see.
very casually, we got to know each other, found it very interesting. And then, as it happened, my company got acquired by a company called PMC. His company got acquired by a company called Mindtree, and I became his customer.
Mhm.
So Aztec Soft slash Mindtree kind of did some work for us at PMC. That's how I came to know him more because of that acquisition. And they were so close to each other, Mindtree's acquisition and BMC's.
Mhm.
In a year, we kind of said, hey, what's next for us? Uh, we've gone through this acquisition. We don't want to work for a big company. Let's figure out something. So that's how this idea of Isertis came up.
I see. So, what? Obviously, you got to know each other, etc., but you didn't really work together.
No,
So, what made you decide to partner with Samir at that point? What were the key attributes that you saw in Samir that made you want to do a startup? Because it can be a long, pretty long journey
that's
together.
right. That's right. And, you know, actually finding a founder that you like and frequencies kind of match is very hard. Icertis was, by the way, my seventh startup and Samir's third. So we had both got through that journey of finding co-founders, working with them and figuring out, what those relationships were. And so we were both careful, as you would think we would be, right? Coming into something like this. And we knew each other, but we didn't know each other closely enough. It never worked.
Mhm.
But I still remember there's a small coffee shop on Ferguson Road in Pune, and we went to have a coffee to figure out what we would like to do. And he said, Monish, what do you dream? And I said, I've been brought up, yeah, even though I studied in India, in the US, did my master's in Florida, I'd spent a lot of time in India and I was based in India. He was based in Seattle. Uh,
Yeah.
and I said, I've always been brought up my whole professional life thinking, or people telling me that no consequential product company is coming out of India.
Mhm.
And this was, in the 2000s, there were like very few companies who were global companies that came out of India. And I said, you know, I've, I've, I've worked through 6 startups. I would love to build a consequential company that can
Mhm.
keep out from India. And he said, exactly. I think, if we can figure this out, I don't have a product idea. I don't know if you do, but
Mhm.
I would love to build a consequential company, no matter what we do.
Right.
So I remember when we started Icertis, we didn't have a product.
Mhm.
We did not have an idea. We said we'll figure this out as we go, but we were very clear that we wanted to build a consequential product company. And that conversation struck with both of us.
Mhm.
As we worked through the pains of a startup, we never forgot that. And that's why you'll see the Isertis culture, the values that we call Forte became such a big part of all of our lives and
Mhm.
of all our associates as well. That resonated with both of us like really well in that conversation.
That's great. And we'll explore Forte in more detail in the conversation. So, how did the idea of Icertis come about? As you said, you didn't really have a product idea at that point. I understand that there was some serendipitous meeting with the legal counsel at Microsoft that kicked things off. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like any other idea that comes in and becomes a seed and grows into a tree, serendipity plays a big role, right? So we were doing a lot of things. We were trying to figure out what to do and where to focus. And our theory was, the cloud is coming. There's a wave. Samir always used to say, you have to be successful. You have to either ride a wave or create a wave. We knew we were not in a position to create a wave, but we could see this whole cloud wave coming, and we were thinking we should ride this wave. And the first applications that would move to the cloud would be not the core applications like ERP or supply chain or finance, but there would be these surround applications that would actually first move to the cloud, where the CIO would be ready to move without
Mhm.
too much hesitation. So we
Yeah.
were busy building some of these surround apps, surround ERP apps, as we call them, including stuff like transportation management and warranty management and so on. And Samir was at a dinner in Seattle, and he met a long-term friend of his who was a associate general counsel in Microsoft. He said, Samir, what are you doing? And Samir said, Icertis, we've been like 3 years now. We are doing this ERP surround. We are very bullish about Azure. It was called Red Dog then, as you know.
Mhm.
Early days of Azure, it had not even been released, but we were working with Microsoft on that. He said, but we are on the Microsoft stack, but we are doing these products. And he said, so this guy who he met said, I don't know what ERP surround is what you're doing, but we have a real problem at Microsoft. I just scrapped a $15 million project to get all of our templates in order in our legal department. Would you be interested in doing something with Microsoft? And I love the way you talk about Azure and the Microsoft stack, and this is what we are looking for as well within Microsoft. And so Samir was like, he was not sure. He said, okay, let me think about it. He called me. He said, Monish, I met a friend of mine. He was saying, can you do CLM? Um, and I said, Samir, I know all about CLM. And he said, how? I never heard the word. I've worked with contracts before, but I never heard of CLM. And I said, no, nothing to do with contracts. It's cloud lifecycle management, because that's what I'd been working on in BFC.
Mhm.
And he said, no, 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 I'm talking about contracts. And CLM is contract lifecycle management. And I said, so I looked it up and I said, Samir, if it's Microsoft, let's do it. That's how we actually got it accidentally. And it was serendipity. Completely
Mm.
got it to CLM.
That's great. So that was the basis for really the core foundation for Isertis. But originally, as you said, you had built a suite of enterprise applications because you were not convinced that contract management on its own was a big market. What made you decide to focus just on contract management?
No, actually, we didn't even think about it as a market. What happened was, because we got Microsoft as a first customer and we were doing
Mhm.
other things as well at that time. I was in Seattle, I was in Bellevue, and Samir and a friend of his we had gone to play golf at the Bellevue Public Municipal Golf Club.
Yeah.
And his friend asked us casually, hey, what are you guys doing? And we said, we have we are doing all of this stuff. And then we have this contract management stuff that we were doing with Microsoft. We just signed with a large pharma company. And then we signed with a couple of companies in India, which were about 500 million in revenue. So large companies. So I said, we said like 4 or 5 customers in CLM, and then we are doing all of this other stuff. And he said, you guys, you don't understand what you're doing. You have, like, at your size, we were about maybe 70 people then.
Mhm.
At your size, you don't get customers like that, like Microsoft and like one of the largest pharma companies in the world and one of the largest IT services companies in the world. You should forget everything else and focus on this. And that was kind of a come to Jesus moment. We both looked at each other and we said,
Mm.
yeah, that makes sense. Actually, it looks like we are finding traction here and we've not been
Mhm.
really focusing on that. And
Mhm.
that's the time when we decided we'll focus on CRM.
Right. And that was Pradeep Singh,
That's
who, yeah,
exactly.
who was a successful entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur on his own.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's great. That's great.
So Pradeep changed the trajectory of what we were doing completely
Mhm.
at that time.
That's amazing. Great advice. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let me now turn it over to Gavri. I think he'll carry on the rest of the conversation. Gavri,
Yeah.
over to you.
Yeah. Hi, Monish. First of all, I want to share a little story of my interaction with Samir. I met him much later than either of you. Icertis was well underway. You guys were raising the first round of funding. Vijay Vashi had called me and said, "Hey, I was had exited at making some investments with other people, and he said, why don't you listen to Samir?" I sat and talked to Samir, and I had no idea what he was talking about. It's like, I was thinking, man, what's he saying? So I went to the Bay Area that weekend, talked to somebody else, and they were all saying, this looks like quote to cash. There was a whole category called quote to cash.
Yeah.
And this looks like these guys who are doing it would extend it, or Microsoft one day will wake up and do it internally. I mean, these are all the pushbacks I was getting on all. It was very valley kind of a thing. And I came back and said, Samir, I'm starting out this early. I don't know if I can make it bet what you're looking for. And till the last time I met him, I said that probably the biggest miss I've ever done in my whole life was not investing, because I had it in my hand to just put 250,000. It wasn't like I was putting millions of dollars. But when you are a small starting out, you have all these fears and all this. And he said, no problem, just we'll continue to talk. And ever since then, Samir and I talk continuously about the mess. But he said, but what I remember of him is the laugh that he would come and say, have you still not forgotten the miss, have you? He says, no. He says, just laugh about it. Don't worry about it. There'll be another one, you'll come along. That was so Samir, right? He just kind of
Absolutely.
didn't think too much about whether I invested or not invested. And he held a lot of our TiE Seattle board meetings were held in the Isertis office, right off of
Yes,
520.
I know. Exactly.
We would meet there, and it was a great, it was great to get to know him through that association. The thing that I want to ask you is, there's a lot of stories of product companies having services arms. There has never been successful companies that started as a services offering spin out a product. And it's not for lack of trying.
Yeah.
There's lots
Yeah,
of service
absolutely.
companies have historical, track record of failing miserably in spinning out products, right? Whatever the case may be. Without,
100%.
but you guys, was it the size? Was it the founders? What was it that made you take that leap? Because you had already built some muscle. You're employing 70 people, so you're making some money, and
Yeah,
not great amounts of money, but still you're in comfort zone.
absolutely. We are building a lifestyle business at that point already, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a very good question. I think if you look at it, because we had done startups before and because we had gone through the pains of acquisition, we knew that we could afford to take our time before we kind of landed on what we wanted to do for the next decade at least. So the services was, and I'm being a little immodest here. The services was a little bit of, let's figure this out, and till then do something kind of a thing, right? The money was not important for both of us, which was good. I think every time I've got into a situation where I'm in a company or I'm raising money and I don't need the money, it feels like, I'm in a position of strength. It is definitely useful. But what I did was I took the time to build a platform at that time on which we could build many apps, because I had all the time in the world. Services was not very intense business at that time. Money was flowing in fairly freely. So we were always looking for an opportunity to build a product, right? And so our DNA, both, even Samir came from a services background, but he also came from a product background. He started his career in National Instruments and then Microsoft, purely product management and so on. Then he moved to, as a CEO, he matured to be the CEO of a services company. But the DNA was still product. Even services, he used to tell me stories about Disha and Aztec Soft. And I could see that it was the product mindset. Even though it was services, it was transactional sometimes and so on and so forth. And, people oriented. The DNA was still product. And I think that's what I've seen so many companies in India. I've seen Infosys and TCS try to make products. I've seen smaller services companies try to make products. They try to do it with the services mindset. It's not good or bad. It's not right or wrong. It's just the DNA or the thinking that kind of constrains you. With products, you take more risk. With products, you have more patience. With products, you really need to know that you can't keep listening to customers. You have to listen to yourself first and then tell customers how things should be done. And with services, you're really doing what the customer is telling you. So that kind of change in DNA or change in thinking probably was already there for us. So that transition became very simple. You know, I I cannot tell you how many services opportunities we have passed like this without really thinking, because we didn't think it was strategic to what we usually is very tempting, right? Because it's quick money and it's guaranteed money almost, right? As opposed to building a product and spending money first before you can see the money come in. And then the other side of that is also equity. And I think he was just so good at this, right? Sensing, when to, raise money, who to go to, how to position. I remember our first deck when we first pitched to a institutional investor was 5 slides, black and white, no pictures, just bullets, right? Simplest deck that could be. But he made this look so powerful, the whole idea and the opportunity and so on with those slides. It was sheer magic. And I think that DNA that came through, that kind of converted us to being what we wanted to do anyway. So that transition was easy for us.
So this we talked about mindset both of you brought to the table, and also when you started, meaning you had a certain level of security from your past exits or life in general that you could take the time to do it, right? Two parts to it. One, at least from our audience perspective, right? A lot of them are looking for co-founders. In your case, you had a long history with others and had a network of people that you had worked with, and so did Samir. So you could have picked anybody
Yeah.
from your own past where you are comfortable with, where you had gone through all this, right? So when looking for that co-founder for a journey, which arguably, as you said, it's equivalent to a marriage, meaning they are long, they are frequent conversations, etc. How did you come to this conclusion? Hey, this is the person I'm going to embark on this journey on. Because it's not you had other choices. Clearly, having done 7 startups, there were lots of people who would have followed you again into a new one because they've been successful with you before. So how did you get to
And
that point?
yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, Samir also had the same choice that I
Yeah.
did. His network was big and he'd already done a couple of startups at that time. And I think, again, serendipity plays a big part, but also at some point when you've done startups and you worked with other co-founders, you get to feel what is right. So both of you met Samir, right? He
Yes.
was larger than life. He was like bubbling with energy. Imagine me, 16 years ago, coming out of a big acquisition, one of the largest of my life, having made some money, having had, our company be, go public on the NASDAQ. I was not really looking for, hey, I'm not looking for a co-founder. As I said, both of us, we actually didn't even have a product idea. What happened was, I think our frequencies just met. We were so comfortable talking to each other. We were so comfortable talking about what we wanted to do in life. We were so comfortable talking about, hey, is there a hurry? What kind of company? What kind of culture? What were the mistakes we made? So those conversations that happened in, our office when he used to come and sit with us, with my co-founder, uh, actually built that relationship without us even realizing it. And then it happens like you just become comfortable with each other. And then when you think about doing something, the first name that pops up is those people. And that's what happened to both of us, I think. So when we said, hey, now it's like 1 year, our lock-in is ending after the acquisitions. We would like to do something else. The first name that popped up in both of our minds was each other, right? So from that perspective, I think it helped kind of come together. And then that conversation in the coffee shop was a seal that it was what I wanted to do, and it was what he wanted to do, and we were convinced that we could work together. And it is hard. It is hard. You both worked with co-founders. You've been co-founders before. It's very hard to work with co-founders over an extended period of time. It's worse than marriage, right? Because there's so many things that you actually fight on, right? There's so many disagreements. You have to develop that kind of trust, saying that, hey, if you have a disagreement, if the other person is fighting with you, they are coming at it because of the right intention, not because of the wrong intention. And I think we had that complete trust in each other that every year we used to spend 2 hours or 3 hours thinking about, are we the right people in the company? Do we want to do this job? And is this somewhere where we should start looking for a CTO or a CEO? Every year we had that conversation without fail. Because we were, first of all, we were also privileged. We had backing, we had a little bit of money. So it's not like, it was a make or break situation. So there was comfort zone. Raising money always came to Samir very naturally. Thankfully in Isertis' case, very easily. So never under money pressure, except maybe for one or two points in Isertis' career. But because of that, I think we had complete trust in each other. And even if we fought like we fought all the time on all kinds of issues, but 5 minutes later, we would forget and we would go to McDonald's and have a McFlurry, which he really loved. So I think that's how we came together and we worked together for so long.
Got it. So, you bring up a great point, right? In all co-founding relationships, life or companies, right? It's when you hit this trough of adversity, you look out at your partner and say, do you have my back, or vice versa, right? Because you got to have your back, even though you're fighting for a cause. The cause could be,
Yeah.
direction, who should be this, who should be that. But the fact that you guys had this fundamental conversation, are we the right ones to do this job? Which means that you weren't worried that somebody's taking your job. You're giving it to somebody who is capable of doing it, was a fundamental thesis, right? But the hardest part is when the science and the medicine spoke to you through the family and others that he can continue in his job while you have to continue in your job, right? That was a big, and how personally was that difficult? Because this is not a situation that happens to very many founders. This is a very unique one where you are still rising, and one founder has to step out for reasons that have nothing to do with performance. So,
Yeah.
how did you sort of digest it and come to terms with it?
Again, it's an excellent question. So what happened even before Samir had his health issues? I had a health issue. I lost vision in my left eye and had to take a break and had to figure out. And it was all treatable. Everything happened. So it all kind of fixed itself. There was a period of about 8 to 9 months where I was like, is this really what I want to do? Right? And can I continue to do this? Because both of us, we loved our work. So we used to do 16-hour days like every day. We were like completely involved. And Samir called me once. He called me and he said, Monish, are you worried? I said, yes, Samir, I'm a little bit worried. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. This is a situation I've never kind of faced in my life. And he said, Patoni played with one eye, he's batting with one eye. Don't worry about that. You'll figure this out. It's um, and he said, don't worry about Icertis. I'm here. We'll figure this out. It's all going to be fine. So forget about everything else. Just focus on your health and just get better. And then 3 years down the line, when he called me and he said, Monish, I have some news and this is what's happened. I said, you told me I'll give you the same advice. Don't worry about it. Just focus on your health. We'll do what we can and we'll figure this out. So nothing to worry about. And that kind of lifted the load off us. And then the conversation was, okay, if I can't be CEO, do you want to be CEO? And said, you know me, I can't be CEO. I just don't, I'm not even interested. I can't do it. I'm not even capable. And we already had someone that we had hired and we made succession plans when, I went through that because we thought, hey, it would be good to have succession plans. So you already had someone in place. So that someone became CEO very naturally. And that transition was pretty smooth. Now, was it hard? Of course it was hard. No question about it. But, because Samir was larger than life, I always thought he'd come back. Like it just be a matter of time and everything would get fixed and everything would be fine. So, we never thought life would play a trick that we never expected. But such is life. I think at the end of the day, what is important, and we've talked about this before, Samir and I, many times. What is important is how the world remembers you. You've got to go one day. It's how the world remembers you, and he used to say, hey, all I need is really for people to think he was a good man.
And that he was. There's no question about it, right? Everyone who had ever interacted with him would be shocked at the generosity of his time, even though he was very busy. And I knew in my back of my head that he was, man, that's a lot of time for him to take, running a startup. Founders have this, sort of take no prisoner approach. He wasn't that.
He was
He
never
was
that.
kind and at the same time firm. It's one of those beautiful lines he walked very well. But this leads me to my last question, Forte. Everything you've said seems like it fits into one of the acronyms, the acronym of Forte. So it looks like it evolved through your time, the time together. Maybe for our audience, you could explain what is it that Forte is and how you guys have how you embarked on it and how you have imbibed it as a company.
It was very interesting. So I think one of the very early conversations we had was, if you want to build a culture, it's not easy. You can't just tell people, hey, this is our culture and behave like this. People don't do that. It doesn't come naturally. Not because they don't want to, it just doesn't come naturally. So we said, everybody has values. They put the values on the wall. They tell people to read them, so on and so forth. How could we make it such that if I woke up someone in the middle of the night and asked them what the Icertis values were, would they be able to quickly remember and kind of say them, articulate them, not just say it, but articulate them? And so I remember in Pune, we were playing with, different, what do values mean for us, right? It's like customer centricity or fairness or respect. And there were like 15, 20 words on the board. And, uh, our HR, head of HR, she was like playing around with it. And she said, hey, you know what? If I collect these 5 words, they become Forte as an acronym. And so we said, yeah, that looks good. And so he said, this is something that we all can remember, including, the founders. If you ask us what our values are, they're Forte. And Forte stands for fairness, openness, respect, teamwork, and execution. So it also kind of has a rhyming quality to it, so you remember. And so we said, any values, they're not bad, they're not good. Many companies have values and they have words that represent those values. But this is something that we can actually claim our own, right? So that's how it started. And what we did was, I think it was not just how easily they are remembered and how they rhyme, but also we made it a point that every year when we had our senior leadership meeting, we went through the occasions in that year for us personally where we were not Forte. And I think this negative lesson did more for us and for the culture of Isertis than anything else. And because we, both of us, I think Samir especially, love to be vulnerable. He never had a problem saying he was wrong or he made a mistake and so on. And we actually brought this through our hearts, from our hearts, in terms of where we went wrong, because we did. Sometimes we were not fair, sometimes we were not respectful. Maybe sometimes, I was angry and I said something in anger which I shouldn't have. Maybe sometimes it was not teamwork. And we made sure that we shared this with the team. And what that did was people started thinking about it. Hey, where did I go wrong? And as soon as you start introspecting with your values, you just imbibe them, right? You don't forget them. And then we said, hey, this is what we want to do with every decision you take. And being Forte became like a keyword. And then we did interviews with people who knew what to ask people to figure out whether this was a Forte conversation, whether people understood what was Forte, and so on and so forth. So we went through a series of things and steps that we did to make sure, the values and the culture evolved from there. And it was great learning for me. It was great learning for me, the way Samir actually had that kind of view of taking an idea and then actually executing it. I was good at thinking about ideas. He actually could take them and make them real. And I think that worked very well for us, I must say.
Monish, this is incredible. Before I turn it over to Shirish, I want to say, right, I want to tell our audience, first of all, meet your partners in coffee shops. The best ideas originate there. And the fact that you pointed out one thing, which is most humans find it very hard, that Samir was openly vulnerable. He would just wear his vulnerable. And I remember this about him so well, that he would just be, I don't know, Gary. Let's figure it out. And it wasn't like he was trying to hide something. He just genuinely was saying, let's collaborate. So
Yeah.
your forte was a reflection of the two of you isn't surprising to me. I think it totally reflects Samir as a person, the way I would remember him. I would still remember that laugh. Nobody could forget that laugh. Nobody could forget that laugh. So Samir,
Yeah,
wherever you are, once we join you, we'll laugh more. Thank you, Monish. Back to
absolutely.
Shirish.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Monish. This was a great conversation. Sad, but also very uplifting at the same time. As Gauri mentioned, who can forget his great laugh? But he was a very focused guy. I could see that in the
Yeah.
board meetings. He was very focused on helping TiE become a major force in the Seattle area. He gave his time generously. He mentored people. He participated in our programs all the time while doing 16-hour days. So he was really a amazing human being, and he'll be greatly missed. And I'm sure he's looking down at you guys and wishing you all great success with Icertis. It's a great company, one of the few companies out of Seattle and India that have done really well. And I wish you all the best moving forward.
No, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I remember Satya sent us a video when Samir passed away. And I don't remember the exact words, but he quoted a line of a song that Samir used to love. And it went something like Takdeer ki hawa kabhi naram kabhi garam. I think the
Mhm.
Takdeer word I got it wrong, but it it's so true, right?
Mhm.
Like you go through these ups and downs, emotions. I miss him, but whenever I remember him, I have a big smile on my face. I'm very grateful for all the memories that he
Mhm.
left. He was one of a kind. Great.
Great. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast from Startup to Exit, brought to you by TiE Seattle. Assisting in production today are Isha Jain and Mini Verma. Please subscribe to our podcast and rate our podcast wherever you listen to them. Hope you enjoyed it.